At my grandmother's funeral, the words that shattered the last piece of my heart didn't come from the pastor or from a distant cousin I barely remembered. They came from my own father. He stood beneath the stained glass window of St. Helena's sunlight, pouring red and gold across his face like some cruel spotlight, and pointed at me as if I were a stranger who had wandered into the wrong grief. "You're dead to us too," he said. Just like that. As if my grandmother's coffin wasn't 3 feet away. As if the woman who raised me wasn't lying inside, surrounded by lilies still clinging to their scent. My sister Aria stood beside him, her lips curving into a small, satisfied smile, the kind people wear when cruelty tastes sweet on their tongue. For a moment I couldn't breathe. The room tilted. Every eye in the pews seemed to turn toward me, waiting to see if I would break or cry or flee. But instead I lifted my chin and said the only thing that kept me standing. "This is Grandma's last wish." The whole church fell silent. And what happened next didn't just expose who my family really was, it ripped their masks clean off. I didn't understand then what my grandmother had left behind for me, or how those words would become the spark that lit an entire war. All I knew was that grief and humiliation had fused into something sharp in my chest, something that refused to let me collapse on that cold wooden floor. I wasn't going to let them bury her memory the same way they buried their decency. The lilies around the casket still held the warmth of her touch, even though she'd been gone for 3 days. The scent mixed with beeswax candles and old hymn books, settling heavy in the air. I had chosen those lilies myself. She always said they reminded her of beginnings, not endings. "Life restarts," she used to whisper when she'd place a vase of them by my bed on nights when the world felt too heavy for a little girl to carry. Now I stood alone in the front pew as the funeral ended, clutching the small ivory envelope she had pressed into my hand 3 days before she slipped away. She had looked at me then with eyes sharp enough to cut through a storm. "For later, Elena," she whispered. "Only when you're ready." I thought she meant when the grief wasn't so raw. I didn't know she meant when the wolves came. The sanctuary emptied slowly, murmurs drifting like smoke between the pews. People offered condolences, neighbors who remembered me from childhood, nurses who had taken turns caring for her in her final weeks, church members who spoke kindly about the way she volunteered every Thanksgiving. Their hands squeezed mine with genuine love. They were nothing like the people waiting at the back of the church, my father and sister, 2 shadows carved from resentment and entitlement. Richard Grant stood stiff in his tailored suit, jaw-clenched fingers tapping the side of his phone with the impatience of a man inconvenienced by loss. He hadn't cried once, not when he entered the church, not when the pastor spoke, not even when they closed the casket. Aria mimicked him like a reflection chin, lifted arms crossed, waiting to strike. When the last mourner stepped outside, they approached. Not to grieve, not to remember her, but to divide her. My father didn't even bother lowering his voice. "We need to talk about the arrangements," he said. "The house, the accounts, the valuables. Let's handle this quickly." My heart stuttered. My grandmother wasn't even in the ground. I glanced at Aria, hoping for even a flicker of humanity, but she only smiled with impatience. "We shouldn't drag this out," she added. "It's better for everyone if we settle things today." Settle things. As if I were some administrative inconvenience. I tightened my grip on the envelope. "Can we not do this right now?" My father's expression hardened. "Elena, don't start. You know you weren't the one taking care of her." That was a lie, a painfully familiar one. I had been her caregiver through every doctor's appointment, every medication adjustment, every late-night panic attack when she couldn't catch her breath. I was the one she called when she felt dizzy, the one who sat by her hospital bed every evening after my nursing shifts. But Richard preferred the version where he was a devoted son, and I was the burden. Aria just preferred anything that made her look better than me. "We'll go to the house now," my father said. "There's paperwork to sign." I stepped back. "No, not today." His eyes narrowed as if he were studying a stain on his shirt. "You're being ungrateful, Elena. After everything your grandmother provided because she loved me, I shot back, not because she owed you. A dangerous silence spread, the kind that warns you a fault line has cracked under your feet. Arya tilted her head, her voice dripping false sympathy. We know this is hard for you. Grandma was sentimental about you, but you need to be realistic. Dad and I are her only real heirs. You're not entitled to make decisions. My breath caught. I'm her granddaughter. Barely, she muttered. Mom always said Dad should have never kept you, Arya, Dad hissed, but he didn't disagree. He never disagreed. This was the moment I felt the shift, not sadness, not confusion, but clarity. These were not people grieving their mother or grandmother. They were vultures circling what they thought was theirs. And then it happened. Richard leaned forward, voice cold and low. Your grandmother is gone, Elena, and honestly, you're dead to us too. The words struck like a slap. My legs trembled. My throat burned. Somewhere in the pew behind me, someone gasped. Arya smirked. They expected me to break the way I used to break when I was a child, to shrink, to apologize, to disappear so they could rewrite the story without me. But my grandmother had left me something they didn't know about. I lifted my chin. My voice didn't shake. Then, here's her last wish. The effect was immediate. My father stiffened. Arya's smirk vanished as if yanked from her face. Conversations in the hallway outside fell silent. I didn't elaborate. I didn't need to. The words hit a place they were terrified existed, a place where my grandmother had acted without their knowledge, without their control. Richard stepped closer. What are you talking about? I held the ivory envelope tighter against my chest. You'll find out. His jaw twitched. For a fraction of a second I saw something sharp flash behind his eyes. Fear. Real fear. Arya glanced between us, her composure cracking. Dad, what does she have? But I didn't stay to answer. I walked past them, past the pew where I used to sit beside my grandmother every Sunday, past the altar where she once taught me how to pray. I didn't stop walking until I reached the cool air outside. The sky was pale and soft, the kind of morning she would have called a gentle beginning. I stood on the church steps and pressed the envelope to my heart. My hands trembled, but not from weakness. Inside it was a key, not just to the past, but to everything that would come next. I didn't open it yet. I wasn't ready. But I knew deep in the same place where grief lived that whatever she had left behind was going to change everything. As I reached the bottom step, Pastor Harper approached me with quiet steps. His voice was soft but steady. Elena, he said, placing a hand on my arm, when you're ready. Come see me. Your grandmother prepared more than you know. I looked at him sharply. Prepared, he nodded. She loved you fiercely, and she wasn't blind to the people who didn't. A chill went through me. Behind us, Richard stood in the doorway, staring down at me with a fury barely contained. Arya hovered beside him, arms crossed, lips thin. I turned away. For the first time, their anger didn't crush me, it revealed them. As I walked toward the parking lot, my grandmother's voice echoed in my memory, steady and warm. Truth survives, even when people lie. I didn't know yet how dark the lies were. I didn't know my father and sister were about to drag me into the kind of legal hell that ruins lives. I didn't know how many traps they had laid long before Grandma ever got sick. All I knew was that she trusted me. And I had just promised her, whether I meant to or not, that I would see her last wish through, even if it meant standing alone, even if it meant facing the family that had already buried me once. I didn't open the envelope until I was alone again. Not in the parking lot where my father watched me like a hunter waiting for his prey to stumble, not in my car where grief pressed against my ribs like a weight, and not even when I pulled into my driveway and shut the door behind me. I waited until I was standing in my grandmother's kitchen, her kitchen bathed in the soft gold of the afternoon sun. The house smelled faintly of lavender the way she always kept it, and for a moment the quiet was so complete, I almost imagined she was still there. Then reality returned, cold and heavy. My fingers finally tugged open the ivory flap. Inside the envelope was a single sheet of paper folded 3 times, her handwriting looping across the front, "When they turn on you." The words made my breath stop. I sank into the chair beside the window, the same chair she used to sit in when she shelled peas in the summer or read her mystery novels. I unfolded the paper slowly, afraid it might crumble in my hands. "Elena, my girl," it began. "I'm sorry I couldn't tell you sooner. Some truths are too dangerous to speak aloud. But you need to know this now. Richard and Aria have been taking things from me. Money, control, freedom. They've been planning something for a long time, and they will come for you the moment I'm gone." My pulse pounded in my ears. "I left everything in place so you would not face them unprotected. Inside the second envelope is the path you must follow. Trust Pastor Harper. Trust Mrs. Cole. Do not sign anything. And don't let their cruelty shake your dignity. Keep your head high the way I taught you." She ended with the words that broke me all over again. "You were my greatest joy." Tears blurred the ink, but I refused to let them fall onto the paper. I folded it carefully like something sacred and held it against my chest. The house felt different now, not empty, but full of warnings I hadn't known how to see before. Every picture frame, every softness in the room whispered that she had lived her last months under pressure she never dared reveal to me. A sound echoed outside, tires crunching on gravel. My body tensed. I peeked through the curtain. Richard and Aria. They had followed me home. I stepped back from the window just as my doorbell rang loud and sharp. For a moment, fear flickered through me, instinctive and bitter. But my grandmother's words echoed in my memory. "Don't let their cruelty shake your dignity," and I drew a slow breath before opening the door. Aria didn't wait to be invited. She brushed past me in a blur of perfume and cold entitlement, tossing her hair as if she owned the place. Richard followed his shoes, tapping heavily across the hardwood floor like a metronome, marking my rising panic. "Why didn't you come with us after the service?" Aria asked, arms-crossed, eyes sweeping the room as if measuring its worth. "Dad and I were waiting." "I told you," I said calmly. "Today wasn't the time." Richard made a low sound in his throat. "You're being difficult." "As usual." "As usual," I repeated. He looked at me with that familiar mix of irritation and disappointment, the expression he wore every time I dared speak for myself. "Your grandmother's estate needs managing. You don't have the experience for that. I was the one taking care of her," I said quietly. "That's exactly the problem." His tone sharpened, slicing through the air. "You made decisions without consulting us." "Decisions?" I blinked. "She asked me to help her. I didn't make decisions." "Oh, Elena, please," Aria cut in. "You were alone with her constantly. We don't know what you said to her." My stomach twisted. The implication hit like ice water. "You think I manipulated her," I whispered. Richard gave a dismissive shrug. "It wouldn't be the first time you tried to get attention by stop," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Just stop." Aria let out a soft laugh. "You always fall apart as soon as someone challenges you." Grandma probably didn't even realize what she was signing half the time. "She was fully aware," I said, gripping the back of a chair. Was she? Aria's tone turned sly. "Because we've already talked to a lawyer. There are ways to contest things when someone's mental state is questionable." My heart hammered against my ribs. Richard pulled a folder from his jacket and dropped it onto the table. Papers spilled out, forms, affidavits, copies of documents I didn't recognize. "What is this?" I asked. "A simple agreement," he said. "A disclaimer of interest. You sign this and you walk away from the estate. Peacefully, peacefully, as if they were offering me mercy. And if I don't?" I asked quietly. Richard's expression hardened into something colder than stone. "Then we'll challenge everything, including that so-called last wish you spouted at the funeral." Aria leaned in, eyes gleaming. "We'll also file a complaint at your workplace. Elder neglect is serious, Elena. Do you really want your license questioned?" My breath caught. They had found the pressure point they knew I couldn't ignore. Being a nurse wasn't just a job, it was the only part of myself I had ever been proud of, the part my grandmother celebrated with tears in her eyes the day I pinned my badge to my scrubs. "You wouldn't," I whispered. "We would," Arya said simply. I steadied my voice. "Grandma trusted me." Arya scoffed. Grandma was confused. "No," I said louder. She wasn't. Really, Arya stepped closer. "Then what was in that envelope? What did she give you?" Her directness jolted me. I hadn't expected her to go straight for the truth. But I didn't flinch. "Something you'll never touch." Arya's face twisted. "Dad, she's hiding something." Richard snapped the folder shut. "You have 48 hours, Elena. Sign the disclaimer. Give up your claim. Accept that you're not entitled to anything." I met his gaze. "She raised me, not you." For a moment, just a moment, something flickered across his eyes. Shame, guilt, or anger at the reminder he had tried so hard to bury. Then it vanished. "This is the last time we ask nicely," he said, stepping toward the door. "Next time it'll be through the court." Arya followed him outside but paused on the porch. The sun lit her hair like a halo, but her smile was all venom. "You can't win," she murmured. "People like you never do." The door shut behind them, and the house fell silent. I stood there shaking my hand, still pressed to the back of the chair. For nearly a minute I couldn't move. Couldn't think, couldn't breathe. Every nerve in my body felt electrified, buzzing with shock and anger and fear. Then something shifted inside me. My grandmother's letter lay on the table. Beside it, the envelope felt heavier than before. I reached for it and felt another layer beneath the first letter. I hadn't noticed it earlier. A second envelope. My heart pounded as I tore it open. Inside was a list of 2 names, Pastor Harper, Mrs. Cole. And beneath the names, a single sentence in my grandmother's perfect handwriting: "They know the truth. Trust them." I pressed the paper to my lips, closing my eyes against the sting of tears. My grandmother hadn't just trusted me, she had prepared for this. She'd known my father and sister would try to strip everything from me the moment she was gone. She'd seen their selfishness long before I ever had, and she had armed me with something they didn't expect. Proof. All I needed now was the courage to follow where she had pointed. I gathered the documents into a neat pile, wiped my eyes, and exhaled slowly. The quiet of the house no longer felt suffocating. It felt watchful, as if she were still here urging me forward. I took my keys, and headed for the door. If they wanted a war, they were about to learn exactly who my grandmother raised, and I wasn't going to lose. I drove to the church at dusk, the sky washed in soft orange and lavender, the kind of colors my grandmother loved. She used to say sunsets were God's way of whispering, "Rest now, child. You made it through another day." But tonight, the sky felt like a warning, too still, too quiet, too heavy. I parked beneath the oak tree where she and I used to sit after Sunday service, sharing muffins we weren't supposed to sneak before dinner. For a moment, the memory softened me. Then the weight of what waited inside pulled me back. I stepped into the empty sanctuary, the wooden floor creaking beneath my shoes like it recognized me. The stained glass glowed faintly from the last light outside, casting warm colors across the pews. I breathed in the familiar scent of old hymnals' candle wax and the faint trace of lilies left from the funeral. My throat tightened again, but I swallowed it down. I was here for a reason. "Elena," a voice called gently. I turned toward the front of the room. Pastor Samuel Harper stood near the pulpit, his hands folded loosely in front of him. He was in his early 70s with silver hair and a face lined not by age but by decades of listening to other people's sorrows. My grandmother trusted him. That was enough for me. I approached slowly. "Pastor, thank you for meeting me." "You sounded troubled on the phone," he said softly. "And Margaret?" "She asked me to help you. That nearly collapsed me right there." He guided me to one of the front pews and sat beside me, giving me time to settle before he spoke again. "Tell me what happened." I took a long breath and let the words spill the confrontation at the funeral, the threats, the forms they tried to make me sign. And finally the letter, my grandmother's warning. The pastor listened without interrupting, his brow tightening with each sentence. When I finished, he nodded slowly. She feared this. She told me months ago she believed Richard and Arya would not accept her decisions. Her decisions, I asked carefully. Pastor? What exactly did she tell you? He looked toward the stained glass windows for a moment, as if choosing his words with reverence. Margaret created a living trust last year. A very thorough one. She transferred every major asset she owned into that trust, her home, her savings, her investments, and she named you, Elena, as the sole beneficiary. My chest tightened. She left everything. To me, she did, he said gently. And she made sure it was done correctly, legally, securely, and out of the reach of those who wished to control her. My pulse pounded in my ears. I felt like the floor could lift beneath me. She didn't tell me, I whispered. She didn't want you to carry that burden while she was alive, he replied. She was trying to protect you. I rubbed my palms against my jeans, trying to ground myself. Pastor, my father and sister said they're going to challenge everything. They said they'll accuse me of elder abuse. He shook his head immediately. Empty threats. I saw her mental clarity myself. She was sharp, intentional, and absolutely aware of what she was doing. Then his voice lowered. And she left proof of that. My heart stopped. What kind of proof? He reached into the inside pocket of his coat and withdrew a small sealed envelope, cream-colored like the one she'd left for me. He held it in his palm for a moment, rubbing his thumb across the seal, as though feeling her presence through it. She gave this to me 3 months ago, he said quietly. She said you would come for it after the funeral. She said it might help you understand the truth. I took the envelope with trembling fingers. My grandmother's handwriting stretched across the front for Elena when the ones you trust reveal themselves. My throat constricted painfully. Do you know what's inside? He hesitated. Only what she told me. Documents, bank statements, a log of transactions she never authorized. He looked at me steadily. Your father and sister were taking money from her, Elena, long before she fell ill. I felt the world tilt. My father, my sister, stealing from the woman who raised me. The pastor continued. She began documenting everything when she first noticed inconsistencies. She hired a financial advisor quietly, someone who helped her untangle the maze of withdrawals and forged authorizations. He paused. She told me she needed to gather evidence before confronting them. But her illness progressed faster than she expected. A wave of nausea crashed through me. It was too much to absorb, too much to believe. Except, I did believe it. Every memory of their sudden attentiveness in the last year. Every argument over her finances. Every time they pressured her to sign something she later told me she didn't understand. It was all there right beneath the surface. Why didn't she tell me, I whispered. Why did she face this alone? Pastor Harper's voice softened. Because she knew you would try to protect her. And she knew that protecting her would put you in their line of fire too early. She wanted you shielded until the time was right. I closed my eyes, letting that sink in. My grandmother fighting a battle by herself, protecting me even as she lost strength. It crushed me in a way grief alone never could. The pastor placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. There is more. I opened my eyes. He continued. She asked me to hold a duplicate copy of her trust documents. If your father or sister tried anything at all, you were to come to me, and I was to give you everything. I exhaled shakily. So she really prepared for all of this. She did, he said. Then he rose to his feet. Come with me. I followed him to a small back office behind the sanctuary. It smelled faintly of cedar and old paper. He opened a file cabinet, unlocked the bottom drawer, and pulled out a large envelope sealed with red tape. My heart thrummed hard. He set it gently on the desk. This is her living trust folder. Inside is her estate plan, notarized and witnessed. It includes signed letters explaining her reasons for choosing you as her beneficiary. She wanted the court, if it came to that, to hear her voice, not just her signature. I brushed my fingers along the seal. I don't know if I'm ready to read it. You will be, he said. And there's someone else you need to see. Mrs. Cole, I asked, recalling the second name on my grandmother's list. He nodded. She knows much more than I do. Margaret confided in her the last few months, especially when things became tense. A chill climbed down my spine. Tense how he sighed heavily. Richard and Aria were coming by the house more often. They pressured Margaret to update her will. They brought documents for her to sign, some legitimate, some not. She refused, but it frightened her. She told me she felt trapped. My breath caught. They intimidated her. She didn't want to say it outright. But yes. He held my gaze with grim certainty. They suspected she was transferring assets away from them. And they didn't take it well. I clenched my hands to stop them from shaking. My grandmother, frail, gentle, dignified, being bullied by the very people who should have loved her. It felt like something poisonous curled inside me. The pastor placed the documents into a protective folder and handed them to me. Take this home, keep it safe, and talk to Mrs. Cole tonight if you can. She has evidence you'll need. I nodded, gathering everything in my arms. My head spun with the weight of it all, trusts, evidence theft, warnings. My grandmother had lived her final chapters in a silence she crafted not out of fear but out of strategy. At the door, the pastor stopped me again. Elena, he said gently, your grandmother loved you deeply. Everything she did was to protect your future. Don't let Richard or Aria erase that truth. I swallowed hard. I won't. Outside, the sky had shifted to deeper purple. The air felt heavy, like the moment before a storm breaks. Holding the folder close, I walked toward my car, each step steadier than the last. I glanced back at the church once before climbing in. It stood anchored in the fading light, sturdy, watchful, and full of the echoes of every secret my grandmother safeguarded here. As I drove away, I whispered into the quiet car, I'm here now, Grandma. I'm ready. But readiness didn't stop my hands from trembling. Because as I turned onto my street, I saw Mrs. Cole standing on her porch as if she'd been waiting for me. And something in her expression told me she knew the storm wasn't coming. It had already begun. Mrs. Cole didn't wave when she saw me. She didn't smile, didn't step forward, didn't call my name the way most neighbors do when they spot someone they know. She simply stood on her porch beneath the soft glow of her lantern light, her hands clasped tightly around a mug, her posture still as stone, watching me, with eyes that held far more awareness than I understood. It made me slow my steps without even realizing it. I stopped at the edge of her walkway. The cicadas hummed loudly in the warm Texas night, filling the silence between us. For a long moment she didn't speak. Then she nodded once, a subtle gesture that felt less like a greeting and more like permission. Come inside, Elena, she said quietly. We need to talk. Her voice had that same steadiness I remembered from childhood, the kind that soothed kids who scraped their knees or calmed nervous parents during backyard barbecues. But tonight, underneath that steadiness, was something heavier, something that made the hairs on my arms rise. I followed her inside. Her living room looked exactly the way I remembered: warm lamps, shelves lined with books, crocheted blankets folded neatly over the back of the couch. But there was a new addition, a stack of folders and envelopes on her coffee table arranged so carefully they almost seemed ritualistic. She motioned for me to sit. I suppose you went to the pastor, she said, lowering herself into the armchair across from me. I nodded. He told me you know things, that Grandma trusted you. Her lips twitched, not into a smile, but into something like sadness. She did. I clasped my hands in my lap. What did she tell you? Mrs. Cole took a long breath before setting her mug down with a soft clink. Your grandmother came to me, she began, long before her health started declining, At first, it was small worries, missing checks, odd withdrawals, mail she never received. Later, it became much worse. My stomach tightened. She suspected my father. She didn't just suspect, Mrs. Cole said quietly. She confirmed it, and Arya too. Her words hit like a physical blow, even though the pastor had already told me. Hearing it again from someone who had watched everything from up close made it real in a new and terrifying way. Mrs. Cole reached toward the stack on the coffee table and pulled out a thin folder. She kept copies of everything she said, bank statements, ledgers, letters from her financial advisor, notes she took herself when she noticed unusual activity. She hesitated before handing it to me, as if the folder itself carried weight. I opened it. The first page was a printed statement from the credit union my grandmother used. Someone had withdrawn $3,000 in cash signed under her name, except the signature wasn't hers. I swallowed hard and kept reading. More withdrawals. More checks written out in amounts that made my heart race. Some of these were over a year ago, I whispered. Mrs. Cole nodded. She didn't want to believe who was behind it at first. She thought maybe a clerical error, maybe misplaced mail, but then she saw your sister's car parked behind the credit union one morning. Arya didn't see her. She paused, or she pretended she didn't. I flipped to the next page and froze. A photocopy of a document, one I immediately recognized. A power of attorney form, signed, dated, processed. Except, Grandma never signed this, I said, my voice cracking. She never would have given control to him. She didn't, Mrs. Cole replied. She told me that herself. She believed Richard forged it or pressured someone into processing it without proper verification. I felt sick. She was terrified once she found this, Mrs. Cole continued. Not for herself, mind you. For you. I looked up sharply. For me, Mrs. Cole's expression softened. She knew they blamed you for everything, your successes, your independence, even the closeness you shared with her. And she knew. When she was gone, they would turn their anger into something dangerous. A cold tremor moved through me. She said you'd be alone once she passed, Mrs. Cole said softly, and that she wanted to leave you protection. I pressed the folder to my chest. She did, I whispered. She left a trust. She left letters. She left all this. Mrs. Cole nodded. She also left something else. My breath caught. She stood from her chair and walked to a cabinet against the wall. She unlocked it, reached inside, and retrieved a small black device, a digital recorder. She gave me this 3 weeks before she died, Mrs. Cole said quietly. She told me to hold on to it until you came. I stared at it. What's on it? Recordings, she said. Her voice, her account of everything that happened, every threat, every forged document, every moment she felt unsafe. Tears burned behind my eyes. She knew they'd go after me. She did, Mrs. Cole replied gently. And she wanted her words, not just paper, to defend you. My hands trembled as I reached for the recorder. Mrs. Cole hesitated. Before you listen, there's something you need to understand. I looked up slowly. Your grandmother loved your father once, she said softly, and she truly tried to rebuild a relationship with him after he left you both. But he grew jealous, bitter, especially when he saw how much she treasured you. I forced myself to breathe. He believed she favored you, that she left him out, that she replaced him with you, she continued. He didn't see the truth that you earned her trust, not stole it. And Arya, she shook her head. Arya picked up his resentment like it was tradition. I closed my eyes. So when your grandmother started losing weight, missing steps, visiting the doctor more often, they saw opportunity. Her voice lowered to almost a whisper, and they began circling. The room felt colder. Mrs. Cole leaned forward and placed a steady hand over mine. This evidence will protect you, but it will also reveal things that will hurt. Margaret asked me to warn you. I opened my eyes. I'm not afraid of the truth. She gave a small, sad smile. She said you wouldn't be. She withdrew her hand and sat back. Now she said gently, "Do you want to hear it?" My pulse thrummed. I looked down at the recorder, small, ordinary, almost unimpressive. It didn't look like something capable of carrying a woman's final war cry, her defense strategy, her SOS, but I knew it did. I pressed play. The room filled with my grandmother's voice, thin from illness, but steady with purpose. "This is Margaret Grant. I am recording this because I fear the documents alone will not be enough. If you are hearing this, Elena, my sweet girl, then they have come for you." My breath hitched. Mrs. Cole closed her eyes, listening. "Richard has been withdrawing money without my knowledge. I confronted him last month. He denied everything. But the next week, more funds were missing. I found checks written to Aria signed with my name. Poorly forged, but enough to fool the bank if they barely looked. My hands balled into fists. When I refused to give them more access, they threatened to challenge my competency. Said I was getting forgetful. Said they would fix things once I wasn't in the way anymore. I bit the inside of my cheek hard enough to taste blood. I don't fear for myself. I fear for Elena. She has been my heart since the day she was born. She will be the one they blame, the one they try to strip of everything. And I can't let that happen. I heard a small gasp from myself, but I didn't stop the recording. I created the living trust to protect her. I chose her because she is the only one who has acted with love, not greed. But Richard and Aria will not accept it. They will attack her character. They will accuse her of elder abuse. They will do anything to break the trust. My vision blurred. "Elena, listen to me. Do not sign anything they put in front of you. Do not let them intimidate you. Trust Samuel. Trust Evelyn Cole. And trust yourself. You are stronger than you know." Mrs. Cole reached out and touched my arm, lightly grounding me. The recording continued. "I'm leaving these logs, these papers, these words to protect you, and I pray you never need them. But if you do, fight back, not with anger, with truth." There was a long pause on the recording. Then her voice softened, full of love. "And know this, my girl. You were never a burden. You were my blessing, my joy, my pride. When the world turns cruel, remember I am still with you." The recording clicked off. The silence afterward felt deafening. I covered my mouth, trying to breathe through the trembling that overtook me. Mrs. Cole didn't speak. She let the moment settle over us like a blanket, thick, heavy, suffocating, but necessary. When I finally lowered my hand, my voice was barely a whisper. "They're going to court," I said. "My father, my sister. They're going to try to take everything." Mrs. Cole nodded once. "Then you'll give them something they didn't expect." "What's that?" "The truth," she said, and Margaret's voice. I swallowed. "Do you think the court will listen?" Her eyes hardened, not cruelly, but with unwavering certainty. With this evidence, with the trust, with witnesses like Pastor Harper and myself. "Yes, they will." I drew a long breath. "Then I'll fight," I whispered. "For her, for what she built, for what she protected." Mrs. Cole gave a slow nod. "That," she said softly, "is exactly what she raised you to do." I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, my grandmother's voice echoed through the dark, steady, brave, heartbreakingly calm, as she documented the betrayal closing in on her. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling until early dawn. Light crept through the blinds, washing the room in pale blue. The house felt different now, charged with her warnings, her love, her preparations. Not empty anymore, just waiting. By the time I got up, my chest ached with exhaustion, but my resolve felt sharper than it ever had. They were coming for me, and I wasn't going to let them win. I brewed coffee I didn't drink and sat at the kitchen table with the Living Trust folder spread open in front of me. Every page felt like a lifeline, a shield my grandmother forged with her own hands. The sun inched higher, casting warm patches of light across the table, and I felt something stir inside me. Determination. Or maybe her strength flowing through me. At exactly 9:12 a.m., my phone buzzed. A text from Aria. We'll be filing today. If you want to avoid embarrassment, sign the disclaimer. This is your last chance." My jaw clenched. No greeting, no pretense. Just entitlement wrapped in threat. Another message came seconds later. "Dad says you're dragging this out on purpose." "Don't be stupid, Elena." I stared at the words for a long moment. The venom in them didn't even surprise me anymore. It was the familiarity that stung. My sister always used pain like punctuation. A third message appeared harsher. "Grandma never meant for you to take over everything. You manipulated her. Everyone sees it. Everyone. Their favorite weapon." I set the phone down before I could respond. They wanted a reaction, something they could twist into hostility, instability, irrational behavior. Even texting back would give them something to spin. No. Today would be on my terms. A soft knock startled me. I froze. Another knock firmer this time. My heart thudded as I walked to the door. My mind raced with possibilities: Richard demanding compliance, Arya arriving early with more threats, or worse, a sheriff delivering something on their behalf. But when I opened the door, a young man stood there holding a white envelope. "Delivery for Elena Grant," he said politely. "I didn't order anything," I replied cautiously. He pointed to the envelope. "From Hale and Porter Law Firm. Certified delivery. I need a signature." My stomach dropped. Of course. They wasted no time. I signed mechanically and closed the door. My hands shook as I slid a finger under the seal. Inside, a formal notice of petition. They had filed for guardianship. Of me. A legal move designed to strip me of rights control and financial oversight, everything. My breath hitched. They were accusing me of elder abuse. A cold wave rolled through me, the kind that steals breath, steals reason. But then my grandmother's voice whispered across my mind, "Do not let them intimidate you." I placed the papers on the table and inhaled sharply. I wasn't alone in this. I had witnesses, documents, recordings, a trust built to withstand everything they were now trying to do. I grabbed my keys. I needed to see an attorney. Hale and Porter, ironically, the same firm my father used, was not who I was going to. Instead, I drove 20 minutes to a small, older building near the courthouse. Mrs. Cole had insisted I see one man in particular, Attorney Jonathan Reese. The sign on his office door was simple, almost dated elder rights and probate litigation. Inside, the waiting room smelled faintly of lemon polish and old books. A receptionist looked up from her desk and smiled warmly. "You must be Elena. Mr. Reese is expecting you." Expecting me? Mrs. Cole had called ahead. The thought steadied me. Jonathan Reese's office was lined with case files, binders, and framed certificates. He stood when I entered, a man in his late 50s with salt and pepper hair, sharp eyes, and a calm demeanor that suggested he'd seen far worse than whatever I was about to show him. "Ms. Grant," he said, offering a firm handshake. "Please sit. I've reviewed the preliminary details Mrs. Cole provided. I understand there's been a petition filed against you." I handed him the notice. He skimmed it quickly, eyebrows lifting only once when he reached the accusation of elder abuse. "Well," he murmured, leaning back, "they're not subtle, are they?" I tried to smile but couldn't manage it. He continued, "This petition is aggressive, poorly grounded, and designed to intimidate, typical when someone wants to force a beneficiary to relinquish rights." He folded his hands. "Tell me everything," so I did. Everything from the funeral confrontation to the forced forms, the threats at my job, my grandmother's trust, the financial inconsistencies, the letters, the recordings, the forged documents, every painful detail. His face stayed unreadable, but as I spoke he took notes fast, his pen moving with quick, decisive strokes. When I finished, he set the pen down. "Ms. Grant, you have a very strong case." I blinked. "I do. You have contemporaneous documentation, witness testimony, corroboration from a pastor and a neighbor, evidence of financial exploitation, and a legally sound trust." He tapped the petition. This is flimsy, manufactured, and frankly, reckless." A small breath escaped me, shaky but real. He wasn't finished. "Your father and sister are counting on you to panic. Most people accused of elder abuse do panic, they crumble, they sign whatever's put in front of them, they avoid court. But you... He gave me a long, level look. You're choosing to fight. Good. My shoulders loosened, tension finally breaking. Here's what needs to happen next, he continued. First, we will file a response denying the allegations. Then we request discovery, including their so-called evidence. They won't have any. Meanwhile, I will prepare motions to validate the trust and challenge their standing to contest it. He leaned forward slightly. Ms. Grant, this will get ugly before it gets better. Your father and sister will escalate, but we will stay ahead of them. And when we walk into probate court, we'll be ready. For the first time since the funeral, I felt something like relief wash over me. Thank you, I whispered. He nodded. Now, about the recordings you mentioned. I started to reach into my bag, but my phone vibrated. The caller ID made my heart plummet. Work. My thumb hovered before I finally answered. Hello, Elena, my supervisor said, voice taut. I just received an anonymous complaint about your care of an elderly family member. My blood froze. Richard. Aria. They had moved this fast. We're required to review it, she continued reluctantly. For now, I'm placing you on temporary leave until the investigation clears. I felt the room tilt. Temporary leave. Suspicion. My job. My purpose hanging by a thread because of their lies. I understand, I said hoarsely, because arguing would make it worse. When I hung up, my hand shook visibly. Mr. Reese watched me quietly. I take it the escalation has begun. They got me suspended, I whispered. He nodded slowly, not surprised. Retaliatory behavior. Very common in financial exploitation disputes. They want to corner you. My throat tightened. It's working. No, he said firmly. It's not. This just handed us another point in your favor. Judges look very harshly on family members who weaponize false reports. I drew a shaky breath. Mr. Reese, how do people do this to their own family? He sighed. Greed is a powerful disease, and it spreads easily between those with the same weaknesses. My eyes burned. Your grandmother saw it long before you did, he added gently. And she set the stage for what comes next. He stood and walked to a file cabinet, retrieving a packet of papers. This is a list of documents we'll need. Bring everything, every receipt, every message, and especially the recordings. I nodded. When is the hearing? I asked. In 2 weeks, he replied. Not much time, but enough. He paused. And Ms. Grant, you should expect them to attempt to contact you, press you, threaten more. I swallowed. They already have. His expression hardened. Then certainly more is coming. Do not engage. When I left the office, the sun was already dipping low, painting the world in amber. The courthouse across the street glowed beneath the light, and for the first time I saw it not as a place of fear, but as the place where everything would be exposed. I walked to my car feeling both heavy and strangely uplifted. My job was on hold. My family was attacking me. My grandmother's trust was now a battleground. But I wasn't alone. As I pulled into my driveway, I saw someone waiting. My father. He stood by his truck with his arms folded shadow-long across my yard. My pulse stuttered, but I didn't step back. He walked toward me slowly, like a man who believed the world bent around his anger. We need to talk, he said, his voice cold. No, I replied, lifting my chin. We really don't. His jaw tightened. You think some lawyer can save you? I don't need saving, I said quietly. I just need the truth. His face twisted into something between rage and disbelief. You are throwing away your life, he spat. Over money. That's your obsession, I said, not mine. He stepped closer, close enough that I could smell the faint bitterness of whiskey on his breath. This isn't over. I met his glare evenly. It is for you. He froze, as if the words stunned him. Then he laughed, sharp, humorless. You're just like her, he sneered, always pretending to be better than everyone else. Margaret filled your head with fantasies. But you'll learn. They all learn. Something inside me snapped. "You should be ashamed," I said softly. "For what you did. For what you're still doing. She deserved better than you." His eyes flashed something dark, something I recognized from childhood. He turned without another word, climbed into his truck, and roared out of the driveway gravel, spitting behind him. The moment he disappeared, I exhaled shakily. My grandmother's voice echoed again. "Fight back. Not with anger, with truth." I pressed a hand to my chest. 2 weeks. 2 weeks until the first hearing. 2 weeks until the mask they wore for years finally shattered under the weight of everything they had done. I looked toward my grandmother's house, my house now, and whispered into the warm, quiet air, "I won't let you down. I promise." I didn't expect the investigation at my workplace to move so quickly. By Monday morning, 2 compliance officers were waiting for me in a small conference room near the HR office, their faces solemn, folders neatly arranged on the table. I'd spent all weekend gathering documents for Mr. Reese, cataloging everything for the upcoming probate hearing, but the moment I stepped into that room, all of it felt distant. This was my job, my patience, my purpose. And now it was hanging in the balance because my father and sister wanted leverage. "Ms. Grant," one officer began gesturing for me to sit. "Thank you for coming in. This shouldn't take long." His tone was gentle but rehearsed, like someone who had delivered bad news many times before. I sat folding my hands tightly in my lap to keep them steady. The second officer opened the file. "We received a report alleging neglect of an elderly family member under your care. We understand this individual has recently passed." My breath tightened. "Yes," I said quietly. "My grandmother." "We're very sorry for your loss," the first officer offered, "but we are required to investigate any allegation involving potential elder abuse or neglect, particularly when the reporter suggests there was medical misconduct." Medical misconduct. Of course they said that. My father and sister didn't do anything halfway, not even lying. "Can you tell us about your role in your grandmother's care?" the second officer asked. I explained everything. How I stayed with her, took her to appointments, monitored her medications, coordinated with her doctor when her symptoms changed. I told them I wasn't her medical provider, I was her granddaughter and caregiver. I emphasized that her decline was due to her illness, not negligence. The officers exchanged a look. "We've reviewed her medical records," the first officer said. "Her physician noted her decline was expected and consistent with her diagnosis." Relief washed through me, but only for a moment. "The complaint, however," he continued, "claims you withheld treatments and manipulated medications." My heart lurched. "That's a lie," I whispered. "We're aware these allegations sometimes arise from family disputes," he acknowledged. "We're not here to assume guilt. But we do need to ask, is there any reason a family member might make a complaint like this?" I hesitated. How much was I allowed to say? How much should I say? Mr. Reese had warned me to be cautious, to avoid revealing details about the trust or the upcoming hearing to anyone who wasn't essential. But hiding the truth wasn't going to help me here. "Yes," I said, finally. "There is a reason." The officers waited. "My father and sister are contesting my grandmother's estate," I explained carefully. "She named me as her beneficiary through a living trust. They were very unhappy about that. They confronted me at the funeral. They threatened legal action. And when I refused to sign documents they pushed at me, they filed a guardianship petition, and now this complaint." Silence followed. The officers shared another glance, this one less cautious, more knowing. "We see this often," the second officer said gently. "Family conflict can escalate quickly after a death, especially when inheritance is involved." The first officer closed the file. "For now, we're marking this complaint as unsubstantiated pending further review. You are still on temporary leave until the final decision, but—" His voice softened. "I don't see anything here that suggests wrongdoing on your part, and the medical records support your account." Air finally reached my lungs again. "Thank you," I whispered. He nodded. "We just need to speak with her physician to complete the file. After that, we'll issue a formal clearance." I left the building feeling lighter, though still shaken. Another hit, another fire to put out. but this one at least was not going to burn my career down. I drove straight to Mrs. Cole's house. She answered before I even knocked, as if she'd been waiting. "You look pale," she said immediately. "What happened?" "They filed a complaint at my workplace," I said, stepping inside, "saying I neglected Grandma. They're trying to ruin me from every angle." She clenched her jaw. "Monsters." "They'll clear me," I added quickly, "but it's exhausting." "Mrs." Cole squeezed my shoulder. "That's the point, Elena. They want you tired, off balance, easier to break in court." I sat on her couch, dropping my head into my hands. How did Grandma deal with this for so long? How did she stay strong? Mrs. Cole sat beside me because she had something to protect, someone. She nudged me gently. "And so do you." Her words steadied me more than she knew. "I need to keep moving," I said, lifting my head. "Mr. Reese wants every document, every message, every recording by Wednesday. We need to be ready before the hearing." Mrs. Cole stood already, heading to her cabinet. "Then let's get to work." We spent hours sorting through everything: her copies of bank statements, her notebooks, where she had tracked every suspicious transaction, screenshots of texts she'd sent me describing the pressure from my father and sister. The deeper we dug, the clearer the pattern became. My grandmother had been under siege long before I realized it. At one point, I found myself staring at a particular bank statement, 2 withdrawals on the same day each for an unusually large amount. "Do you know what these were?" I asked. Mrs. Cole exhaled slowly. "Yes, Margaret asked me to drive her to the bank that morning. She wanted proof someone else was draining her funds. She told the teller she had not made the previous withdrawals. They checked the signature logs. And it wasn't hers, she said. But she never confronted Richard again. She knew it wouldn't stop him. It would only make him hide it better." My vision blurred. Mrs. Cole reached over and handed me a tissue. "You can cry, you know." "I'm trying not to," I said with a shaky laugh. She gave me a look. "Why on earth not? Because every time I fall apart, they win," I murmured. "They want me emotional, irrational, easy to corner." Mrs. Cole placed a steady hand over mine. "Feeling doesn't make you weak, Elena. It makes you human. What matters is that you don't let those feelings dictate your decisions." I nodded slowly. She was right, but I still couldn't let myself unravel. Not yet. By late afternoon, we had assembled 3 full binders of evidence, color-coded, tabbed, organized. My grandmother would have been proud. I drove them straight to Mr. Reese's office, and he looked almost impressed as I carried everything in. "This," he said, flipping through the tabs, "is exactly what we need. The judge won't ignore this." I felt a small spark of hope, but it didn't last long, because as soon as I walked back outside, my phone buzzed again. A number I didn't recognize. But the voice, instant dread. "Hello, Elena," Aria said sweetly. "Working hard today, I didn't respond." She continued, "Dad and I just met with our attorney. He thinks the guardianship petition will go smoothly, especially if the court hears about your work suspension." My spine stiffened. I wasn't suspended for misconduct. They won't know that, she said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "Perception is everything." I closed my eyes. "Aria, why are you doing this? What did I ever do to you?" There was a long silence on her end. Then she laughed quietly. "You existed," she said. "That's all it took." My breath hitched. "You took everything," she continued. "Dad's attention, Grandma's love. Every time she praised you, I was invisible. Every time she gave you something, I got nothing. So yes, I'm done being invisible." I shook my head slowly. "Grandma loved both of us." "No," Aria snapped. "She loved you. She tolerated me." Her bitterness oozed through every syllable. "She promised me the house when I was little," Aria said suddenly. "Did you know that she told me it would be mine someday? But then you swooped in with your perfect nurse routine and your selflessness, and suddenly you were the chosen one." "I didn't choose any of this," I whispered. "Liar," she said coldly. "You wanted it." I clenched my jaw. What I wanted was for her to be safe. What I wanted was for us to be a family. Too late for that, Arya said. Much too late. She ended the call. I stood frozen on the sidewalk, the sunlight suddenly too bright, the air too hot. She hated me, not casually, not resentfully, deeply, enough to destroy me. I returned home shaken, but when I walked inside, the quiet of my grandmother's living room steadied me. I sat in her chair by the window, breathing in the faint scent of lavender that clung to the cushions. Then I saw it. A framed photograph on the mantel. It was always there, but tonight it felt different. Me at age 7, missing 2 teeth, standing beside my grandmother in her garden, both of us holding sunflowers bigger than our faces. We looked so happy. Pure, uncomplicated happiness. I whispered to the empty room, "I'll fight for us. For what you built, for what they're trying to destroy." The house felt warm, almost alive, as if she were still there listening. I picked up my notebook and wrote a single line at the top of the page, 2 weeks until court. I will not break. But that night, as I prepared for bed, I felt a shadow creep under my skin. A sense that my father and sister were not finished, not even close. And I was right. Because when dawn broke the next morning, another envelope sat on my porch. No postage, no return address, just one word written in bold marker across the front traitor. The envelope lay on my porch like a threat, made visible, its edges curling slightly from the morning humidity. For a long moment I just stood there barefoot on the cool wooden boards, staring at the single word scrawled across the front in heavy black ink. Traitor. My breath hitched. The sun was barely rising, the neighborhood still wrapped in that quiet, bluish calm that comes before the world wakes up. Birds were chirping. A sprinkler hissed somewhere down the street. And yet everything inside me felt sharp and alert, like the world had tilted sideways. I bent down, slowly picked up the envelope and held it by the corner. It wasn't thick, just a few sheets of paper inside, no stamp, no address. Someone had put it here. Someone who knew where I lived, someone who wanted me to see this first thing in the morning, someone who wanted to scare me. I stepped back inside, locked the door, and placed the envelope on the kitchen table. My hands trembled before I could stop them. It was ridiculous. I had dealt with worse already. Lies, accusations, legal threats. But there was something about seeing a word like that on my doorstep, something handwritten and personal that hit deeper than a formal petition ever could. I forced myself to open it. Inside were printed screenshots, comments from social media, anonymous posts, quotes taken out of context. But the narrative was unmistakable. Some nurse took advantage of her dying grandma to steal the house. Where do people like that come from? If she shows up in court, let her rot. My stomach twisted. They had turned the internet into a weapon. Someone, likely my sister, had posted vague accusations framed as concern, prompting strangers to fill in the blanks with venom of their own. At the bottom of the stack was a handwritten note. "You don't deserve her house. You don't deserve anything. Drop the case, or it gets worse." I closed my eyes and inhaled slowly, fighting off the wave of nausea rising through me. This wasn't just intimidation. This was psychological warfare. After a few moments, I gathered the papers into a neat pile and slid them into a folder. Mr. Reese needed to see this. Everything needed to be documented now, every threat, every attempt to manipulate or frighten me. Just as I stood to put my shoes on, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. A woman's voice came through, tight, emotional, barely controlled. "Is this Elena Grant?" "Yes." "This is Dr. Newell's office," she said, referring to my grandmother's physician. "I wanted to let you know your father and sister called this morning, asking for access to your grandmother's final medical notes." My grip on the phone tightened. "What? They don't have authorization," I know the woman said, "which is why we refused. But they were insistent. They said they needed proof that you interfered with her care." My stomach dropped. "And did they get anything?" "Absolutely not," she said firmly. "Your grandmother's records are sealed unless you release them or the court requests them. We wanted you to know in case this becomes a repeated issue." Repeated. Meaning, They weren't stopping here. Thank you, I whispered. Of course. And Elena, for what it's worth, your grandmother always spoke highly of you. It was clear you took excellent care of her. Don't let anyone twist that. I shut my eyes, letting the reassurance settle. After ending the call, I slid the threats into my bag and headed out. I needed to see Mr. Reese. He needed to know how far my father and sister were willing to go. Mr. Reese wasn't surprised when he saw the envelope. He didn't flinch, didn't soften, just studied each page with a sharp, calculating eye. This is harassment, he said, and potentially defamation. It's anonymous, I reminded him. He tapped the top page. Your sister is sloppy. The formatting here is identical to her past posts. And if she or your father distributed these, trust me, the court will be very interested in this behavior. I swallowed. Can they use the accusations online against me? Not in the way they intend, he said. But we can use it against them, shows malicious intent and coordinated harassment. He placed the pages into his own binder. Now, he said, sitting back in his chair, there's something we need to discuss. I tensed. What the guardianship petition hearing is only 10 days away. They will try to paint you as unstable, manipulative, financially desperate, whatever narrative benefits their claim. I looked down. He continued. We need to counter that by showing consistency, responsibility, and transparency. I recommend gathering statements from colleagues, neighbors, anyone who observed your care for your grandmother. If your sister is escalating, we escalate too, but with facts. I nodded slowly. He leaned forward. And Elena, they will attempt to provoke you into reacting emotionally. Don't. Judges notice demeanor. Stay calm. Let them reveal their own anger. I'll try, I murmured. He gave a small smile. You're doing better than you think. I left his office feeling steadier, though the envelope still burned in the back of my mind. When I arrived home, Mrs. Cole was already on my porch, arms crossed, her expression dark with concern. You got something this morning, she said. I saw you pick it up before I left to walk the dog. I exhaled shakily. It wasn't good. She followed me inside, and I showed her the pages. Her nostrils flared. Cowards. They want you rattled before court. It's working, I admitted quietly. Mrs. Cole placed her hands on my shoulders. Look at me, I did. You are stronger than they think, she said. And you are not fighting alone. Her eyes softened. Your grandmother didn't prepare all of this because she doubted you. She prepared it because she trusted you to carry her truth. Emotion tightened my throat. Thank you. She squeezed my arm. Come over tonight. I made dinner. You shouldn't be alone. For once, I didn't argue. That evening at Mrs. Cole's table, I picked at my food, distracted. The soft clinking of silverware and the hum of her old ceiling fan filled the air. Something's still on your mind, she said gently. I hesitated. Mrs. Cole, do you know why my grandmother never confronted them? Why she stayed silent even when they were hurting her? Mrs. Cole sighed. She didn't want to destroy whatever fragile ties your father still had to her. She hoped desperately that he would remember the son he used to be. She paused, her expression wistful. But people change. And then, some don't. I swallowed hard. I feel guilty, like I failed her by not seeing it sooner. Mrs. Cole shook her head firmly. You cannot blame yourself for the secrets she chose to carry. She wanted to protect you from that pain. A tear slipped down my cheek, surprising me. Mrs. Cole handed me a napkin. She loved you fiercely, she whispered. Enough to prepare years ahead to shield you. Enough to trust you with her legacy. Legacy. The word hit something deep. Speaking of legacy, Mrs. Cole said, standing abruptly, there's something I haven't shown you yet. She walked to her cabinet again, retrieving another small folder. When she handed it to me, I saw my grandmother's handwriting on the front. For Elena when they try to rewrite history. My breath caught. Inside were photographs, old ones. My father, younger, smiling brightly. My grandmother beside him, proud. Then the years progressed, his smile fading, distance growing. One picture made my breath tremble. A photo of me at about 5 years old clinging to my grandmother's leg, crying. My father stood a few feet away, arms crossed, annoyed. On the back in her handwriting, she always ran to me. Even then he resented it. I closed my eyes. This wasn't new. This had been building for decades. My grandmother had seen the fracture long before it reached the breaking point. When I opened my eyes, Mrs. Cole was watching me carefully. You see now, this wasn't about money. This was about envy, possession, punishment. And I was the target, I whispered. She nodded. Yes. The truth landed with a heaviness that stole my breath. After dinner, I walked home alone, the night cool against my skin, stars dim and distant. But when I reached my porch, another envelope sat on the step, this one smaller. My hands shook as I picked it up. Inside was a single piece of paper, a printed screenshot of my nursing badge. Underneath, typed in bold, "Enjoy your job while you still have it." My vision blurred with fury and fear, but then something inside me hardened. I went inside, turned on every light in the house, and gathered every document, recording, and photograph into the center of my dining table. 10 days. 10 days until court. 10 days until the truth ripped their lies apart. I whispered into the quiet house, steady and sure you wanted a war. My hand stilled over my grandmother's trust. Now I'm ready for one. The week leading up to the hearing felt like walking through a minefield, every step, careful, every breath, measured, every hour packed with preparation. Mr. Reese had warned me this would be the most critical stretch, the days when my father and sister would become bold, frantic, unpredictable. He was right, but even knowing that didn't prepare me for how relentless they would be. On Tuesday morning, as I stepped outside to bring in the trash cans, I saw my neighbor across the street. Mr. Alvarez standing on his driveway, arms folded, staring at me with something like confusion in his eyes. "Elena," he called out. "Is everything okay?" I forced a small smile. Trying to be. He hesitated, then said, "I saw something online." I wasn't sure if it was real. I froze. "What did you see?" I asked quietly. He approached slowly, lowering his voice. "A post saying you stole from your grandmother, that you pressured her. It didn't sound like you. It didn't look like something you'd ever do. But people are talking. The word hit like a blow. This wasn't just anonymous strangers, now it was neighbors, community members, people who had seen me grow up. My sister wasn't just poking the fire, she was pouring gasoline on it. "I don't know who posted that," I said carefully, "but it isn't true." He nodded. I figured. But it's spreading fast. A chill moved through me. I thanked him and stepped back inside, closing the door with shaking hands. My phone buzzed almost immediately. Messages from coworkers, distant cousins, even a few old classmates. "Is everything okay? Just saw something online. Hope it's not true. Did you really do what they're saying?" I pressed my palms to my eyes, willing the sting away. This was exactly what Aria wanted: chaos, humiliation, doubt. She wanted me isolated by suspicion before I even stepped into the courtroom. But she underestimated me. And she underestimated the people who actually knew the truth. By noon, I was at Mrs. Cole's house, binder in hand, exhaustion sitting heavy in my chest. She opened the door, took one look at me and said, "What did they do now?" I handed her my phone, showing her the posts. Her face darkened, lips thinning with anger. "Defamation," she muttered. "Pure and simple." She scrolled through the comments, shaking her head. "This is desperate behavior. And it tells me one thing: they are terrified of the trust." I sank into her couch. "How do I fight lies that spread this fast with truth that's louder?" she said firmly. "And with people willing to speak it." She handed my phone back. "Do you remember what your grandmother told me before she died?" I shook my head. She said, "When they try to bury my girl in lies, make them choke on the truth." My breath hitched. That sounded exactly like her, gentle but fierce enough to stand her ground even at the edge of death. Mrs. Cole placed a hand on my shoulder. "We'll get through this." Now let's review everything for tomorrow's meeting with Mr. Reese. We spent the next 3 hours refining timelines, highlighting inconsistencies in my father's behavior, matching bank statements to withdrawals, and polishing the witness statements from neighbors who had seen me caring for my grandmother. It felt like building a wall brick by brick, reinforcing every weak spot, sealing every crack. My grandmother hadn't just left me weapons, she'd left me strategy. By late afternoon, Mrs. Cole and I walked across the lawn to my grandmother's house, my house now, to look through her desk for anything we may have missed. The previous weeks had been so emotionally overwhelming that parts of the house still felt untouched by grief, frozen in time. In her desk drawer, beneath envelopes and old birthday cards, I found a small, leather-bound notebook. Her handwriting covered the first page. Daily notes only for Elena when the time comes. My breath stilled. Mrs. Cole touched my arm. "Are you okay?" I nodded faintly, though my chest ached as I opened to the first entry. Day 1. I believe Richard is taking money again. I don't want to jump to conclusions, but things don't add up. Day 7. More withdrawals I didn't authorize. Need to investigate. Day 14. I confronted him. He lied. I can see the anger in his eyes. He resents me leaning on Elena. My pulse quickened as I flipped through the pages. Some entries were brief, some were paragraphs, all were painful. Day 22. Arya asked me to sign a form today. Said it was routine. It wasn't. I refused. Day 27. Elena brought me soup. Bless that child, she doesn't know the weight I'm carrying. Day 36. I fear they will turn on her when I'm gone. By the time I reached the last entry, my eyes were blurred. Day 51. I feel weaker today. If I don't finish this, let the pages speak for me. They must not hurt my girl. I pressed the notebook to my chest, tears sliding silently down my cheeks. Mrs. Cole wrapped her arm around me. This is powerful evidence, Elena. The court will listen to this." I nodded, unable to speak. The truth wasn't just in legal documents now. It was in her words, her fear, her love, her resolve. That evening after Mrs. Cole left, I sat alone in the house, surrounded by stacks of folders and binders. The sun dipped lower shadows stretching across the floor like long fingers. My grandmother's chair creaked softly when I sat in it, and for a moment I let myself imagine her beside me, her warmth, her steadiness, her unwavering belief in me. I had so much to carry, too much, maybe. I leaned back and closed my eyes, letting exhaustion wash through me, until my phone buzzed, a voicemail from an unknown number. I pressed play. My father's voice spilled into the room, raw, angry, slurred, just enough to tell me he'd been drinking. "You listen to me," he said shakily. "You're not winning this. You think you're smarter. You're nothing without her. Nothing. And you're not getting that damn house." A long pause. Then a quieter voice in the background, Arya sounding irritated. "Dad, hang up. She's recording this. She's always recording." Then the line cut. I stared at the phone, the rage building deep inside me, not a blind anger, not hot and reckless, but cold, clean, focused. Mrs. Cole was right. This was desperation. They were unraveling, and they knew it. The next morning I drove to Mr. Reese's office with the notebook, the voicemail, and every shred of evidence we'd collected. He scanned through the notebook, eyebrows lifting. "This is devastating for their case," he murmured. "Contemporaneous notes from your grandmother, clear concern about exploitation, and direct mention of being pressured." I swallowed. "And the voicemail." He played it twice, expression hardening. "This," he said, "is golden." I clasped my hands in my lap. "So, we have enough." He closed the notebook gently. "We are not just prepared, Ms. Grant. We are armed." Relief washed through me, brief, fragile, but real. But he added, holding my gaze, "They will not go down quietly. Expect one more major push before the hearing." "One more," I whispered. "Yes, desperate people do desperate things." I left his office with those words echoing inside me. Desperate people, my father, my sister, my family. When I got home, the wind had picked up, rustling the trees with an uneasy whisper. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and stopped cold. Something was wrong. The air felt disturbed, heavy. I set my bag down slowly, my pulse quickening as I walked toward the living room. A picture frame lay face down on the floor. My grandmother's photo. I picked it up breath-catching as I realized it had been knocked over deliberately. Someone had been in my home. My chest tightened. The window above the sink was cracked open. Not broken, just unlocked. A warning. A reminder. A message. I backed away slowly, reached for my phone, and called the police. When the officer arrived, he walked through the house, shining his flashlight in corners, checking the locks, taking notes. No signs of forced entry, he said. Could be someone with a key. Or someone who knew how to jimmy the window. My father had a key. So did Arya. "Do you feel unsafe staying here tonight?" he asked. I glanced at the photo in my hands, my grandmother smiling. Steady, brave. "No," I said quietly. "I'm staying." But when the officer left and the house fell silent again, I whispered into the stillness, "This ends in court." And for the first time, I truly believed it, because fear was their weapon. But truth was mine. The morning of the hearing arrived with a sky the color of bruised steel, heavy clouds drifting low over the courthouse, as if the world itself understood what was about to unfold. I woke before dawn, nerves humming beneath my skin, sleep nothing more than a suggestion that never quite reached me. My grandmother's notebook lay on my nightstand, the last page still marked by the small ribbon she had left inside. For a moment I rested my fingers on it, letting her strength settle into me. Then I stood dressed carefully and watched my reflection steady itself in the mirror. "You're ready," I whispered, "because she made you ready." By 7 o'clock, I was driving toward the courthouse with binders stacked neatly in the passenger seat, the weight of documentation like a shield beside me. Rain began to mist across the windshield, soft at first, then steadier, drumming lightly, almost soothing against the glass. When I stepped into the courthouse lobby, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, I spotted Mr. Reese waiting for me. His suit was sharp, his expression composed, but his eyes held a spark of something close to battle readiness. "Morning, Ms. Grant," he said with a nod. "You're early." "Good." "I couldn't sleep," I admitted. "Most people don't on days like this," he replied. "But you're here. That's what matters." He motioned for me to follow him toward the security checkpoint. My hands trembled slightly, but I kept them steady against my bag strap. Beyond the metal detectors, a hallway stretched toward a set of double doors leading to probate courtroom 4. Inside, everything would change. As we walked, Mr. Reese spoke softly. "Remember, stay calm. Let them show the judge who they are, and speak only when spoken to. Truth wins in these rooms, even when it feels like the world outside doesn't believe it." I nodded, breathing in slow, measured sips of air. When we entered the courtroom, I froze for half a second at the sight on the other side of the aisle. My father and my sister sat at the petitioner's table. Richard wore a suit he probably hadn't brought out since a wedding years ago. His jaw was clenched, his shoulders stiff. Arya sat beside him in a charcoal blazer, her hair straightened to an almost unnatural precision. Her expression was perfectly crafted, somber enough to look wounded, confident enough to appear resolute. A performance. She saw me and smirked. Mr. Reese placed a hand on my shoulder, grounding me. "Ignore her." I forced myself forward. As we approached our table, their attorney, Mr. Beck, a slick man with a too-white smile, leaned toward Richard and whispered something that made both him and Arya glance my way. I sat down, fingers clasped tightly together. My grandmother's voice whispered in the back of my mind, "When they turn on you, do not bow." The bailiff stepped forward. "All rise." The Honorable Judge Marisol Klein, presiding. We stood. Judge Klein entered, a woman in her mid-50s with a grounded presence, her dark hair pulled back, her gaze sharp enough to slice through pretense. She took her seat and scanned the courtroom. "Be seated." The sound of 30 chairs creaking filled the room. "We're here today for a hearing on the guardianship petition filed by Richard and Aria Grant against respondent Elena Grant," she said, her tone brisk. "Petitioners, you may begin." Mr. Beck rose, smoothing his tie in one practiced motion. "Your Honor, this case is about a vulnerable elderly woman whose granddaughter exerted undue influence and isolated her from her rightful heirs. We intend to show a pattern of manipulation, neglect, and financial misconduct by Ms. Grant that objection," Mr. Reese said calmly, rising to his feet. "Argumentative opening and unsupported." Judge Klein raised a hand slightly. "Overruled for now. I'll allow brief framing, but keep it factual, Mr. Beck." Mr. Beck nodded and launched into a carefully rehearsed monologue, painting me as a controlling caregiver who exploited my grandmother's decline for financial gain. He mentioned my temporary leave from work. He hinted that my grandmother's mental state had deteriorated months before her death. He used words like vulnerable and confused, twisting the narrative with expert precision. But as he spoke, something unexpected happened. Richard wouldn't stop glaring at me, and Aria kept adjusting her hair and tapping her pen's small tells of agitation. Not the calm, innocent family they wanted to portray. When Mr. Beck finished, Judge Klein turned to Mr. Reese. Respondent Mr. Reese stood buttoning his jacket with deliberate composure. "Your Honor, what the petitioners have presented is a story, a fiction crafted to cover their own misconduct. Today we will show documented proof of financial exploitation by the petitioners, a legally valid living trust, executed with full capacity and evidence both written and audio of the grandmother's intent to protect Ms. Grant from the petitioner's manipulations." A murmur spread through the courtroom, and finally he added, "We will highlight attempts to intimidate, defame, and harass Ms. Grant in the weeks following her grandmother's death." Judge Klein raised an eyebrow but nodded. "Proceed." Mr. Reese approached the center of the courtroom. Respondent calls Evelyn Cole to the stand. "Mrs. Cole." She stood from the row behind me, spine straight, chin lifted, and walked forward with quiet dignity. As she swore in and took her seat, I felt a swell of gratitude so strong it hurt. Mr. Reese smiled warmly at her. "Mrs. Cole, how long did you know Margaret Grant?" "Over 40 years, she said. "She was like family to me." "Did she ever express concern regarding her finances?" "Yes," Mrs. Cole said firmly. "Beginning more than a year before her death." "Did she tell you who she believed was taking money without her permission?" "Her son Richard and her granddaughter Aria." On the petitioner's side, Aria's face flushed bright red. Richard shifted uncomfortably, jaw tightening. "And did she document these concerns?" "She did. I have copies." Mr. Reese held up the folder we had assembled. "Your Honor, we offer Exhibit A bank statements and handwritten logs documenting unauthorized withdrawals." Mr. Beck sprang up. "Objection. These logs are unverified, subjective." "They are contemporaneous," Mr. Reese countered, "and accompanied by bank records confirming discrepancies." Judge Klein waved her hand. "Motion to admit Exhibit A is granted." Richard muttered something under his breath. Next, Mr. Reese pressed play on the audio recordings, my grandmother's voice filling the courtroom, trembling yet resolute, detailing her fear of my father's anger, her sense of being pressured, and her explicit desire to protect me. The room fell silent. Even Judge Klein leaned forward slightly. When the recording ended, Mrs. Cole dabbed her eyes. "Mrs. Cole," Mr. Reese said gently, "did Margaret ever express doubt about Elena's intentions?" "Never," she said without hesitation. She trusted Elena completely, and she was afraid of her son and granddaughter. Very afraid. The weight of those words hung heavy in the air. Mr. Reese nodded. No further questions. Mr. Beck's cross-examination was a clumsy dance of insinuations and deflections, but Mrs. Cole didn't waver. Every question rolled off her like water. When she stepped down, Mr. Beck looked rattled. Next came Pastor Harper. His testimony was calm, compassionate, unmistakably credible. He spoke of my grandmother's clarity in creating the living trust, her fear of confrontation, her meticulous planning to protect me. Judge Klein listened intently. Finally, it was my turn. My heartbeat thundered as I took the witness stand. I swore in palms, sweating breath shallow. Mr. Reese approached me with reassuring steadiness. Elena, did you ever take money from your grandmother? No. Did you ever isolate her from family? No. She chose when to see people. Did you ever neglect her medical care? Never. I swallowed, then added, voice trembling, I loved her. A few people in the gallery wiped their eyes. When it was Mr. Beck's turn, he rose with a predator's smile. Ms. Grant, he began, isn't it true that you benefited financially from your grandmother's death, inheriting her home and assets through a trust she created willingly? Yes. So you had motive. My grandmother had intent, I corrected softly. There's a difference. A few quiet gasps rippled through the room. Mr. Beck tried another angle. Why were you put on leave from your job? An anonymous complaint was filed. It was investigated and found baseless. So the complaint exists. So does its falseness. He frowned. Ms. Grant, he said, voice rising, isn't it possible your grandmother was confused and you influenced her decisions? My throat tightened, but then something inside me steadied. No, I said. What's possible is that you're describing your clients. The courtroom erupted with murmurs. Judge Klein banged her gavel. Order, Mr. Beck, flustered, stepped back. No further questions, he muttered. As I returned to my seat, I felt the faintest tremble in my hands, but also a fire, small but steady, rising in my chest. When both sides rested, Judge Klein closed the file in front of her. Her expression was unreadable. The court will reconvene for my ruling in 3 days, she said. This courtroom is adjourned. The gavel struck. A hush fell, then chaos erupted, papers gathering, chairs scraping, whispers rising. Arya stood, eyes blazing with hatred. Richard clenched his fists, face flushed with rage. But I didn't look away. Not anymore. As I walked out of the courtroom, the rain had stopped. The clouds had started to break. 3 days. 3 days until the truth would finally destroy their lies. 3 days until the war my grandmother prepared me for found its verdict. I stepped into the thinning light and whispered, Almost there, Grandma. Almost home. The next 3 days moved with the slow, heavy inevitability of storm clouds rolling in, too quiet, too tense, too full of a silence that felt like breath being held. Every hour stretched suspended between fear and certainty, hope and dread. I tried to keep myself busy, sorting documents, cleaning rooms, walking laps around the house, but nothing eased the coil of anticipation winding tighter in my chest. And underneath it all, a question kept pulsing. What would they do now? Because Mr. Reese had been right, my father and sister wouldn't go down without one last swing. That swing arrived on the second evening. I had just finished dinner at Mrs. Cole's when my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. I stepped outside onto the porch, letting the warm Texas night settle around me as I answered. Hello, Elena Grant, a crisp voice asked. This is Officer Wells with Travis County Sheriff's Office. Are you available to speak? My breath froze. Yes, I'm what's wrong. We received a police report tonight, he said carefully, alleging that you threatened your sister and father with violence outside the courthouse after your hearing. The porch railing blurred for a moment. I gripped it tightly. That's not true. I said each word precise. I didn't speak to them at all after the hearing. I figured as much. Officer Wells replied, his tone shifting, slightly less formal, more human. We've reviewed camera footage from the courthouse. Your interaction with them was minimal and civil, but we're required to contact you to document your response. So this wasn't an arrest call. It was a scare tactic. It was psychological warfare all over again. I understand, I said quietly. Don't worry, he added. Their story doesn't match what we saw. Just try to stay clear of them until the judge issues her ruling. After the call ended, I leaned against the porch post, letting the night breeze wash over me. My heart still thudded too fast. Mrs. Cole stepped outside, concern etched on her face. "What happened?" "They filed a police report," I said, voice shaking, "saying I threatened them." Her mouth tightened. "Of course they did. They're trying to bait you into reacting, trying to build a narrative. I know," I whispered. "I know." She touched my arm. "Do you want to stay here tonight?" "Yes," I admitted. "I don't want to go home alone." She nodded and guided me back inside, making up the guest room with soft blankets and a lavender-scented pillow. It smelled like safety. It smelled like my grandmother. I drifted into an uneasy sleep, waking once to a distant knock that turned out to be nothing more than wind rattling the gate. Still, the sound lodged itself in my chest, a reminder that fear likes to masquerade as imagination in the dark. By morning, exhaustion clung to my bones, but I moved through the motions, coffee shower, reviewing documents again with Mr. Reese to keep momentum alive. 3 days of waiting. And on the morning of the 3rd, the call came. Ms. Grant, the courthouse clerk, said Judge Klein is ready to deliver her ruling. Please arrive by 10:45. My pulse began a rapid staccato. I'll be there. Mrs. Cole drove with me. She insisted. No one should face judgment day alone, she said, squeezing my hand before she started the car. The drive felt dreamlike. Familiar streets blurring by sunlight, flashing across the hood, everything moving, but my thoughts trapped in place. At the courthouse steps, Mr. Reese joined us, carrying only one binder this time. "You're ready," he said simply. Inside, probate courtroom 4, everything felt heavier than before. My father and sister were already there. Arya had dressed in soft pastels, trying to radiate innocence, but her eyes were hard, razor-sharp. Richard sat forward in his chair, hands clasped as if in prayer, but the tension in his jaw betrayed the truth. He wasn't praying. He was bracing. When the bailiff called us to rise, and Judge Klein entered, a hush settled over the room like dust falling. "Be seated." The judge folded her hands on the bench and surveyed the courtroom. Her gaze lingered on the petitioners, then on me, then briefly on the gallery where Mrs. Cole and Pastor Harper sat. "I have reviewed the evidence testimony and all submitted exhibits," she began, her tone calm but unyielding. "This ruling addresses both the guardianship petition and the validity of the living trust executed by the decedent Margaret Grant." Arya inhaled sharply, chest rising. Richard leaned forward, shoulders tight. My palms grew damp despite the cool courtroom air. Judge Klein continued. "Regarding the guardianship petition filed against respondent Elena Grant, I find the claims unsubstantiated and lacking credible evidence. The petition asserts elder abuse, neglect, and undue influence. However," she lifted the notebook, "the decedent's own contemporaneous logs clearly reflect concern for exploitation by the petitioners, not the respondent." Arya's face drained of color. Richard looked like he'd been struck. Judge Klein's voice remained steady. "I also find the audio recordings provided, which document the decedent's awareness, intent, and fear, highly persuasive. There is no indication she lacked capacity when executing her living trust." She paused, letting the silence settle thickly. "Therefore, the guardianship petition is dismissed with prejudice." A collective exhale swept through the room. But the judge wasn't finished. "Furthermore, regarding the living trust, I find it legally sound and reflective of the decedent's clear intent. The transfer of assets into the trust was legitimate, voluntary, and done with full mental capacity. As such, I affirm the validity of the trust and the appointment of respondent Elena Grant as sole beneficiary." Arya gasped loud enough for the gallery to hear. Richard's face contorted into something dark and ugly. My own breath trembled out of me, relief washing through my limbs so suddenly I nearly swayed. But Judge Klein lifted a hand. "One more matter," she said, her tone sharpening. "The court cannot ignore the evidence of potential financial exploitation of the decedent by the petitioners." The logs corroborating bank statements and testimony suggest a pattern of unauthorized withdrawals and pressure exerted upon the decedent to alter legal documents. Arya's jaw dropped. Richard's fists closed on the table. These findings fall outside the scope of probate, Judge Klein said, but I am required to refer suspected elder financial abuse to the district attorney's office. Mr. Beck sputtered. Your Honor, with respect, there is no proof. There is ample cause for investigation, Judge Klein interrupted. This referral is mandatory. Richard surged to his feet. This is ridiculous. She turned my own mother against me. Sit down, Judge Klein ordered, voice sharp as a whip crack. He froze. The room froze. Judge Klein looked at me, then, not with sympathy, not with softness, but with respect. Ms. Grant, she said, your grandmother took deliberate steps to protect you. You have honored those steps with diligence and integrity. This court recognizes that. My throat tightened painfully. Court is adjourned. The gavel struck. The room erupted, whispers, sighs, the scrape of moving chairs. But all I heard was my grandmother's voice humming through my memory like a thread tying me to solid ground. Fight with truth. I stood slowly, my legs unsteady, but holding strong. Mrs. Cole wrapped her arms around me. Pastor Harper rested a gentle hand on my shoulder. Mr. Reese gave me a small nod, the close-lipped smile of a man satisfied with a battle well fought. Across the room, Arya stared at me with a mixture of fury and disbelief. You ruined everything, she hissed, stepping closer until Mr. Beck grabbed her arm. I met her gaze evenly. No. You ruined what wasn't yours. Richard stalked past me, eyes burning. He stopped just long enough to spit out, You think you've won? You think this is the end? I didn't flinch. Yes, I said simply. I do. He opened his mouth to retort, but Mrs. Cole stepped between us with a glare so sharp it could have cut glass. If you threaten her again, she said coldly, I will testify to every conversation you ever had with Margaret. Now get out. He recoiled as though slapped, and for the first time I saw fear, not anger, flash in his eyes. He turned and stormed out of the courtroom, Arya trailing behind him in a swirl of frustration, their exit as messy as their lies. When the doors slammed behind them, I sagged into the nearest bench, covering my face with my hands. It was over. Legally, officially, undeniably over. I heard Mrs. Cole's voice beside me. She'd be proud of you, you know. Tears spilled hot and fast down my cheeks. I hope so. I know so, she said, squeezing my hand. The late morning sunlight streamed through the hallway windows as we stepped outside, warm and bright for the first time in days. I closed my eyes and let it wash over me. I could almost hear her whisper, You made it, my girl. I breathed in deeply, exhaled, and finally felt the weight begin to lift. I didn't go home right away after the hearing. Something inside me, some quiet instinct shaped by months of fighting and years of surviving, told me that stepping back into my grandmother's house alone would feel too loud, too empty, too full of echoes I wasn't ready to face. So instead, I drove to Lake Briar, the place where she used to take me when the world felt unkind. The water was calm that afternoon, its surface shimmering in the sunlight like a sheet of hammered silver. I stood at the shoreline and let the wind lift strands of my hair as memories drifted in and out, her laughter, her advice, the way she'd squeeze my hand whenever she sensed I needed grounding, even before I said a word. For the first time since her death, I felt something close to peace. But healing is never a single moment. It's a series of quiet choices, choosing to breathe, choosing to move, choosing to keep going. And I wasn't finished choosing yet. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Arya. Just 3 words, You destroyed us. I stared at it, feeling no pain this time, no sting, only clarity. I deleted the message, blocked the number, and finally turned toward the future instead of the rubble behind me. When I arrived home, Mrs. Cole was sitting on my porch swing, her knitting bag beside her feet, rocking gently, like she'd been waiting for hours. You didn't think I'd let you come home alone today, did you? She said, smiling softly. I sat next to her, and for several moments we didn't speak. We simply rocked in sync, letting the warm evening settle over us. "Do you feel relief?" she finally asked. "Yes," I answered. "But also empty." She nodded knowingly. Victory doesn't erase the grief that came before it. Those are two different weights. We watched a pair of robins hopping across the lawn. "Your grandmother was prepared for today," she said, "but she also prepared you for tomorrow. That's what matters now. Tomorrow." The word felt like something I could touch. I slept deeply that night. No nightmares, no jolting awake, only the kind of sleep that feels like a slow return to self. And when morning light seeped through the curtains, I realized something surprising. For the first time in months, I wasn't afraid. I made myself coffee in my grandmother's old blue mug and stood at the kitchen sink watching the sun rise behind the oak tree. The day was quiet, predictable, safe, until the knock on the door. I set down the mug, heart tightening for just a moment, old instincts rising. But when I opened the door, it wasn't my father or Aria. It was Deputy Hargrove. "Morning, Ms. Grant," he said gently. "Sorry to bother you, but the DA's office asked us to notify you that formal charges are moving forward." I stepped aside to let him in, though he shook his head. "Won't take long," he continued. "Your father and sister are being investigated for elder financial exploitation, filing a false police report, attempted interference with a trust and coercion." My stomach tightened. Hearing it out loud felt heavier than reading it in legal documents. More real. Will they? I hesitated. Will they go to jail? "That depends on the DA," he answered. "But there's strong evidence, and Judge Klein's referral carries weight." I exhaled slowly. Deputy Hargrove softened his voice. "You did the right thing, Elena. This system works better because of people like your grandmother and people like you who follow through." "Thank you," I whispered. After he left, I sat on the couch, letting the weight of the moment settle into me. There was no joy in knowing they might be punished. Only necessity. Only truth. Around noon, Mr. Reese called. "Elena," he began, "I just received notice that the DA wants to speak with you next week. Don't worry, it's standard. They need your perspective to support the investigation. Do I need to prepare anything?" "Just be honest," he said. "You've been honest from the start. That's why you prevailed." His confidence steadied me. "And Elena," he added. "Yes, you should be proud of yourself." I swallowed the sudden tightness in my throat. "Thank you." After the call, I decided to go through my grandmother's office, something I'd been avoiding for weeks. The room smelled faintly of her perfume, warm and floral. The books on her shelves were still perfectly arranged, and her reading glasses rested atop an unfinished crossword. I touched the arm of her favorite chair. "I'm trying," I whispered. "I promise I'm trying." I didn't know if I expected an answer, but the room felt lighter somehow. In her desk drawer beneath old letters and clipped recipes, I found a sealed envelope I hadn't noticed before. My name was written in her looping handwriting. My breath hitched as I opened it. Inside was a single-page letter. "My girl, if you're reading this, the truth has surfaced, and the battles I feared for you have been fought. I knew you would stand tall. I always knew. Now you must build something new from the pieces they tried to break. Something that belongs entirely to you. Let love guide you, not fear. Let justice follow you, not bitterness. And let your heart remain soft, because softness is not weakness, but the mark of someone who survived without losing herself. Your future is bigger than their cruelty. Live it fully." Grandma A. tear slid onto the page, but I didn't wipe it away. I let myself feel everything: relief, sadness, triumph, longing, because grief, too, is love, and I had a lifetime of it. That evening, Pastor Harper stopped by with a folder in his hands. "Your grandmother asked me to hold on to this," he said, settling into the living room chair. "She wanted it given to you only after the legal dust settled." I opened the folder slowly. Inside were documents outlining her idea for a foundation, one she had drafted years ago but never completed. The Margaret Grant Fund for Senior Protection and Advocacy Mission Support and defend elderly individuals who cannot defend themselves. I covered my mouth with one hand, overwhelmed. She knew what happened to her wasn't just about her, Pastor Harper said gently. She wanted to help others long before she realized she would need help herself. She was always ahead of everyone, I whispered. He smiled. She believed you'd finish what she started. The idea stirred something in me, a sense of purpose forming in the space where fear used to live. We talked for nearly an hour about logistics, funding, legal structures. By the time he left, a new path had taken shape in my mind, clear and bright. Later, as dusk settled, I took a walk to Mrs. Cole's house. She was watering her flowers when she noticed me approaching. "Hey, sweetheart," she said, putting down the watering can. "Long day, long but good," I replied. "I think I know what I want to do with the inheritance." She raised her brows. "Oh, I want to start a foundation in her name, something that helps seniors like her, something she'd be proud of." Mrs. Cole's eyes softened. "That sounds like exactly the kind of future she wanted for you." We stood side by side watching the pink glow of sundown stretch across the street. "You know," she said after a moment, "a future doesn't erase the past, but it gives you more than the past ever could." I nodded. She gave me more than I ever realized. "And you'll pass it on," she said simply. When I returned home, I opened the windows to let in the night breeze and placed my grandmother's letter on the kitchen counter where I could see it. I made myself tea curled up on the couch and let the quiet settle around me, not the heavy silence of grief anymore, but the gentle hush of beginning again. Tomorrow I would start planning the foundation. Next week I'd meet with the DA. Next month the house would feel different, lighter, maybe even joyful someday. Healing wasn't linear, but it was possible. And as I sat alone in the home she built, surrounded by the echoes of her voice and the blueprint of her hopes, I understood something with a depth that reached straight into my bones. My grandmother hadn't just saved me. She'd handed me a future. And now it was my turn to live it. I didn't expect the dedication ceremony to feel so intimate. The community center was modest white walls, polished concrete floors, simple round tables dressed with lavender cloths, but the room pulsed with something warm and quietly powerful. Perhaps it was because everyone here had a story. Everyone here understood loss, injustice, or the strange ache of trying to protect someone who couldn't protect themselves. Or perhaps it was simply because this was the first day of the life my grandmother had envisioned long before I realized it was also the first day of mine. The sign above the stage read, "The Helen Grant Foundation for Senior Protection and Dignity." The words stood bold in deep navy letters, and for a moment I couldn't look directly at them. It felt like staring into the sun, too bright, too meaningful. Mrs. Cole approached from behind and rested a hand on my shoulder. "She'd be proud," she whispered. I turned toward her, grateful for the familiar steadiness in her gaze. "I hope so." "No," she corrected softly, "she would be. Don't dilute it with doubt." The mayor spoke first, thanking the donors and acknowledging the need for legal and emotional support for elderly residents, vulnerable to manipulation. Then Pastor Harper stepped up to offer a prayer, simple, heartfelt, anchored in gratitude. Finally, it was my turn. As I climbed the steps to the podium, my heartbeat quickened. Faces blurred for a moment. Counselors, volunteers, city officials, survivors of elder exploitation, daughters who had fought for their parents, grandsons who had learned, too late, neighbors who had witnessed and done something. These were my people now. This was my circle. I drew in a slow breath. "My name is Elena Grant." I began, my voice trembling only at the edges, and this foundation exists because my grandmother believed that dignity is the one thing no one should ever lose. Not to fear, not to age, not to manipulation, and certainly not to family. A ripple of emotion moved through the crowd. I continued, letting the truth steady me. She knew what it felt like to be pressured, silenced, and financially exploited by the people she trusted most. And she spent her final years building safeguards not just for herself, but for anyone who might one day need them. When she died, She left behind more than a house or savings or instructions. She left behind a blueprint for justice. My throat tightened briefly, but I kept going. She protected me from a storm I didn't even see coming. And now I intend to protect others in her name. I stepped away from the microphone to the sound of applause that rose not in volume but in sincerity, like a wave washing gently against the shoreline. It didn't feel celebratory. It felt collective, shared, understood, carried. After the ceremony, people approached me one by one. A woman in her 60s whose father had been pressured into signing his house away to a nephew. A retired teacher whose sister had been scammed by a caregiver. A young man whose grandmother had been isolated by relatives until they drained her bank account. Each story brushed against mine like branches touching briefly in the wind. One woman pressed my hands between hers. "The battle you fought," she said with trembling sincerity, "you fought it for all of us too." I didn't know what to say, so I squeezed her hands back. By late afternoon, the crowd began to thin until only the volunteers and organizers remained. The sun spilled through the tall windows, casting long streaks of gold across the floor, soft, warm, almost familiar. I stood quietly absorbing the moment. It felt like a threshold, a hinge between what had been and what would be. "Ready?" Mrs. Cole asked, stepping beside me. "Yes," I said, and I meant it. We left the center together and drove to the cemetery. Pastor Harper met us there carrying a small bouquet of white lilies I recognized immediately, my grandmother's favorite. The three of us walked to her headstone. The grass around it had filled in beautifully since the burial. The earth settled the soil steady. My heart felt something similar. I knelt down and placed the lilies at the base of the stone. "Hi, Grandma," I whispered. "I think we did it." The breeze shifted warm and gentle, brushing against my cheek, like a hand I no longer reached for but still felt. "I wish you were here," I said softly. "But maybe you are." Pastor Harper closed his eyes in a quiet gesture of prayer. Mrs. Cole stood with her hands clasped, and for a moment the world was still. When they stepped back to give me a moment alone, I sat in the grass, letting its coolness ground me. "You loved me before I knew how to love myself," I murmured. "You defended me before I knew I needed defending. And now I promise I'll spend the rest of my life honoring what you gave me." A robin landed nearby, hopping through the grass with a tilted head as if listening. I smiled. It was time. I stood and walked to the small wooden bench beneath the oak tree, the one she and I used to sit on during warm evenings when cicadas hummed and the air felt like velvet. I sat there for a few minutes alone, letting the memories come and go without fear. When I finally rose to leave, I felt lighter. Not because the grief was gone, but because it had found a place inside me where it no longer hurt to touch. That evening back at home, I brewed tea, wrapped myself in a blanket, and settled into the old porch swing. The night air was cool, and fireflies blinked across the yard like tiny stars drifting close to earth. I thought about my future, something I hadn't dared to envision in months. A future where I helped others. A future where my grandmother's name meant safety and hope. A future built not from fear but from purpose. And as I rocked gently, my phone buzzed. A message from the Foundation's new hotline showed our very first inquiry. My mother may be in trouble. I don't know who else to call. I felt no hesitation. I typed back, "You're not alone. We're here to help." A quiet certainty settled over me. This was where I belonged, not fighting my past anymore, but protecting someone else's present. The stars shimmered overhead, and I imagined my grandmother somewhere among them, smiling with that soft, knowing warmth she always carried. "Thank you," I whispered into the night. "For everything." And for the first time since her passing, I felt her answer not in words, but in the steady rise of hope inside my chest. Before I went indoors, I looked back at the dark yard, the glowing porch, the quiet street, and the Foundation materials waiting on my desk. This was my life now. This was my calling. And this was just the beginning. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. If this story touched you, I hope you'll leave a comment below and tell me what part resonated most. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need a reminder that dignity, justice, and true family can still prevail. Your support helps us continue creating stories that honor resilience, courage, and the unbreakable power of choosing what's right.